everyone, and welcome to the January edition of the Farmers Supply Association Agriculture Report. I'm Randy Kopechka, agronomist with Farmers Supply Association. Happy New Year to everybody. It's about time to start another crop. Seems like we just finished the last one. I say that every year, but you know, time goes around pretty quickly, and we'll be starting another crop here real soon. What I want to talk about in this month's program is furrow irrigated rice. Some people call it row rice. Some people call it growing rice on beds. Several ways it's described, but furrow irrigated rice I think is probably the main terminology that's used here. It continues to grow in popularity in Arkansas and specifically in much of our area. Jared Hartke, Extension Rice Specialist, estimates that about 200,000 acres of rice are grown in this system in Arkansas. Of course, the big reason why is pretty much a no-brainer. You don't have to have levees out there. Obviously, you're going to save in labor costs since you don't have to mess with the levees, equipment costs since you don't have to mess with the levees. Generally, it's just going to be easier to do. I mean, that's not saying there's not work and some problems with it, but overall, there's going to be less labor, less equipment associated with it. So if you can grow rice without levees, and make similar yields, it's almost a no-brainer to at least try it on your farm. What I want to talk about today is some of the agronomic recommendations with row rice. This is probably more geared for some of the people that are getting into it new, although I think some of it will be useful for people that are somewhat more experienced with row rice. Number one, varieties, and most of you have probably heard this before. The big issue with variety selection, in my opinion and everybody's opinion with row rice, is a lot of that rice, especially the top part of the field, is not going to have a flood on it. It's a known fact that rice is more sensitive to blast when there's not a flood out there. So it's critical, if you're not going to be able to help control blast with a flood, then you need to plant a resistant variety. And the best blast resistance is with the hybrids, so I think you need to be leaning towards planting a hybrid for that reason. There's some other reasons as well. Hybrids generally have a more extensive root system, so for that reason we're going to eliminate probably some other stresses as well. Less likely to be drought stress because it's going to have a deeper root system. Less likely to have fertility issues because you're going to have a deeper root system that's mining more of those nutrients out of there, so that's going to help you a lot. Also, talking about blast, fungicides are not totally effective on blast as good as they are on maybe some other diseases. So that really makes us point to planting that good variety. Since we're not going to have the flood, fungicides are not great on blast. They help, but they're not necessarily great on blast. You really got to have that resistant variety, in my opinion. So lean towards the hybrids. That's not saying that you can't grow a non-hybrid in row rice situations. People have done it. I've known people that have planted Jupiter, some of the Horizon Ag Clearfield varieties out there, and had some success with it. But overall, there's less risk, I should say, with these hybrids, so I think you should lean that way as far as varieties. Second thing I want to talk about is an insect that's not necessarily specific to row rice, but it's worse than row rice, and that's called the bill bug. We've dealt with the bill bug forever in rice. I mean, I've dealt with it my whole career, but generally, you've got a flood in between the levees, and the bill bug is not a problem where there's a flood. We see the bill bug in our conventional, rice, levee rice, is on the levees or maybe an area of the field that can't be flooded. But of course, in the row rice, we're going to have more of that field that's not going to be flooded, especially the top part of the field. So the bill bug is going to cause some issues. It bores in at the base of the plant, essentially kills the plant. You'll see a white heads out in the field. And if there's whiteheads out there, there's other reasons such as blast for whiteheads, stalk borers, etc. But a lot of times if there's no water and you see a whitehead, a lot of time it's because of that bill bug. You can go out there and just pull on the stalk, and you'll essentially pull the whole stalk up because it's kind of rotted off down at the bottom where that bill bug is fed. So we need to worry about trying to do what we can to control it. There's still research ongoing with that. But what they found so far is probably one of the insecticide seed treatments is probably going to be your best bet. Most of the time we're using a neonicotinoid seed treatment such as Cruiser or Nipsit. They're not that great on the bill bug, but the diamides they found have been more effective. So diamides would include Dermacor, also Fortenza. So what you probably need to do is do a combination insecticide seed treatment with either the Cruiser or the Nipsit in combination with a Dermacor or the Fertenza. And that's going to help you with your soil insects, give you some general vigor and help with that. So that's the bill bug. Next thing, fertility. Fertility is going, especially nitrogen fertility, is going to be just a little bit different in the row rice system. You know, we're not flooding it up and keeping a stable environment for that nitrogen not to be lost. So we're going to have some issues. You know, if we do try to put a whole bunch of nitrogen out there at one time, it's probably not the best way of doing that. So a lot of research has been done on that. And what they found in our silt loam soils is probably the three-way split is probably going to be our best bet. That's 3 100-pound shots of urea. The first one about that normal 5-leaf timing like we do with our conventional rice system, and then 2 more in subsequent 7 to 10-day applications. And that's probably about the researchers have found to be about the best way to fertilize, again, the row rice on silt loam soils. You know, they've had success in their tests with even the single pre-flood and the 2-way split, but there's generally going to be more risk with that and probably, you know, less likely to have some issues and not be as efficient. So I think, you know, as far as a standard for the silt loam soils, probably that 3-way 100-pound split is probably going to be our best bet. Clay soils are going to need another 100 pounds, so they're probably going to need 4 100-pound shots to be more efficient. Again, that's on the clay soil. So again, we're going to have to split that nitrogen up maybe a little bit more than we're used to on the row rice especially. Another nutrient that might be a little bit different in the row rice is phosphorus. Phosphorus in general becomes more available when a flood is applied. So we generally don't see a lot of phosphorus issues in our conventional levee rice system because we've got that flood and it makes that phosphorus more available. Obviously, we're not going to have that flood, or at least especially on the top part of the field in this row rice system. So there's more of a chance for phosphorus to get to not be to be an issue, for us to see deficiency symptoms of phosphorus out there. So I think we're going to have to be wary of that and aware of that, and you know, put a phosphorus application out there. We need to still base it on a soil test, but we're more likely to need phosphorus in this row rice system, and the places where we're more likely to see that are on the really high pH soils, those pHs over 6.5, and especially we get in the 7s and above, and we have low soil test phosphorus. So in those situations, really be aware that you may need a phosphorus shot, and let's try to get that phosphorus out there as close to when the plant needs it as we can. There's a lot of things can tie up phosphorus, so you know, we want to wait, you know, to right at planting or even maybe pre-flood to get your phosphorus out there. Get it as close to when that plant's going to use it as we can and get the benefit of that phosphorus. Another thing we need to look at with row rice that's going to be different is weed control. You know, our conventional levee rice system, water is actually kind of like a herbicide for us. We've got the water to kind of help us with our weed control system. We're not going to have that, again, especially on the top part of that field right there. Our spectrum is going to change a little bit. Some weeds that we're going to see a lot more of that maybe we don't see as much in a flooded field will be pigweed, and also a couple of the grasses, crabgrass and goosegrass, because floods do not really do anything. I mean, a flood is pretty effective on crabgrass and goosegrass. So, you know, without that flood, we don't have that additional thing fighting those two grasses. So we're going to need more herbicide activity on those grasses maybe than we would in a conventional flooded situation where the flood is suppressing those grasses. So, you know, residuals are going to be the key again. Nothing new there. I talk about residuals, you know, every year, and we're becoming more and more reliant on them, and we're almost totally relying on them now. So it's very important, you know, to overlap those residuals. I think where we need to start probably in our row rice system in most situations would be command plus sharpen. The sharpen will give us some additional control on pigweed. If they're not PPO resistant now, you know, we may not get great control out of sharpen because there's a lot of PPO resistance. So, but I still think we need to put that sharpen in there in most cases. It'll also give us some activity on the annual sedges, so, you know, give us some help there. So I think a command plus sharpen application to start out. We need to watch command on, we're growing some of this row rice on some cut ground that's pretty sandy, and I know last year I saw some 4-ounce rates of command kill some rice because, you know, it's on sandy soils, cut ground. So be leery if you're planting, you know, if you're growing rice on these real sandy soils that have been cut. You know, we may not be able to use the command even at those low rates, so be aware of that. You know, we also need to incorporate prowl, bolero, and facet into our system. Generally, a lot of times in this row rice system, we'll need to use maybe all of those. to get us a good program going right there. So use various combinations of these residual herbicides, and I think if we'll do that, we can do a pretty good job of fighting off our grass and also some of our broadleafs as well. Pigweeds, again, can be a major issue in row rice because we're not helping suppress them with that flood. Some of the post-emerge materials that we can use include Loyant. Loyant is outstanding on pigweeds, so we can do that. A lot of times if they're not too big, an 8-ounce rate of Loyant can be very effective on pigweeds. Stam Grandstand, I've seen that be very effective on small pigweeds as well, so that may be another option for us. And then later in the season, we got to get it the right timing. We got to wait till around internode elongation to put out 2,4-D. But 2,4-D, if we can use 2,4-D in our area, it can be a big help in controlling those pigweeds. But generally at that time, our pigweeds are going to be pretty big. So we want to try to control them earlier when they're smaller. But if we get to that point, then certainly 2,4-D can be a big benefit to us as well. Also, if you're growing a clear field or a full page variety, we've got the New Path, which can help on our grass and some broadleafs as well. So that can be another bullet for us if you're using again, the clear field or the full page hybrids for your variety in your row rice. Some other things I won't get into for lack of time, but construction of beds, the type of beds to use, planting practices, irrigation, the timing and things like that. There's a lot of good information on that. As far as beds, we want them as shallow as we can get them. And in some cases, especially on clay soils and other situations, we might just be able to plant flat and pull some kind of little channel or water furrow, a shallow furrow out there to let the water run down. Don't even have to have an actual traditional bed. So again, as shallow as we can get them and still get it to water good. I mean, we can't get it so shallow that it's crossing over, or things like that. But get it as shallow as you can and still be effective. Again, planting practices are very important. Irrigation, if you're not used to using moisture sensors, you might want to learn more about that and start getting those in your program. They can be very helpful in row rice irrigation. So a lot of good information there. The Extension Service has a FIR handbook, Furrow Irrigated Rice Handbook. It's online right now. I'm not sure if any hard copies are available, but you can go to the Extension Service website and learn more about the furrow irrigated rice, and a lot of good information there. I'd like to give a shout out to a couple of Newport class of 2009 graduates, Justin Klepechka, of course my son, and also Matthew Davis, who's the county extension agent here in Jackson County, both doing a lot of work in row rice. Justin's done most of his PhD work in row rice. Matthew's had a lot of trials, demonstrations in Jackson County about row rice. So some good sources of information right there. And just want to give a shout out to a couple of Newport High School graduates that are doing a lot of good work in row rice. So for more information on any of this, you can contact me through Farmer Supply Association. And this has been Randy Klepechka with your January edition of the Farmer Supply Association Agriculture Report.